"Stop!" The host mom shrieked as I saved the child whose lips had turned blue. Now she's shelling out $40,000 in legal fees because the jury saw the truth. My mom teared up yesterday when I turned down the Millers' full-time nanny offer. At a playdate, some parents gave me a hard time for being a babysitter right up until a kid started choking. I'd been babysitting for the Millers for 2 years when Mrs. Miller asked me to take her 4-year-old boy to a playdate at her friend Grace's house while she worked. With tattoos on my arms and purple streaks in my hair, I probably looked like every suburban mom's worst nightmare for who was watching their kids, especially at 19. But after 3 years as a paramedic, I'd already saved more lives than most people do in a lifetime. When I walked in with little Jackson, Grace, the host mom, eyed me and pulled Mrs. Miller's son away like I was contagious. "So, you're the babysitter?" She drawled as if I didn't speak English. "We usually only allow parents or relatives at these playdates, but I guess we can make an exception just this once." She then turned to the other moms and practically yelled that everyone should keep an eye on their kids today, hinting at a lack of proper supervision. I was helping Jackson take off his shoes when another mom asked if I was still in high school. When I said no, she looked at Grace and sniffed. "Oh, so you dropped out? That explains why you're doing this instead of going to college like normal girls your age." Before I could even respond, she launched into a rant about how too many teens drop out and think raising other people's children is a career. Grace then started asking about my qualifications, using air quotes. She asked if I'd taken child development, CPR, or basic nutrition. She cut me off and told the other moms this was exactly why she always met caregivers beforehand. You just never know what kind of person is being trusted with innocent children these days. She went on, pointedly glancing at my tattoos. "Some people think anyone with a pulse can watch kids." They made me sit in the living room corner while the kids played, treating me like hired help who shouldn't mix with adults. One mom, looking right at me, loudly declared, "That's the difference between a professional and someone who just needs quick cash," clearly referring to her Harvard-educated nanny. We invest in people who see childcare as a calling, not teenagers, who probably spend the whole time on their phones while the TV babysits. Grace brought out organic food for the kids and actually asked if I even knew what organic meant. When I stayed silent, she told her friends that these types fed kids processed junk because they clearly didn't understand nutrition. "She probably gives Jackson McDonald's every day and calls it dinner," she added, as I opened juice boxes for the kids. This is what happens when overwhelmed parents get desperate and hire the first warm body who responds to their ad. They started talking about their nanny salaries, making sure I heard about their extensive background checks and reference requirements. Some even said they wouldn't hire anyone under 25, claiming they lacked the maturity and life experience to handle problems. They giggled as she sneered. "Can you imagine trusting someone who probably can't even do their own laundry with your child's life?" These girls think babysitting is just easy money until something goes wrong and they panic. Grace even tried to test me, asking what I'd do if a child had an allergic reaction. Before I could answer, she told everyone I'd probably didn't know what an EpiPen was. "This is the problem with informal childcare arrangements," she said. "No training, no education. Just teenagers who think watching their younger siblings makes them qualified to care for other people's children." Then the latecomers' kids started coughing while eating grapes, and her mom just laughed. Kids always make dramatic noises for attention. As the coughing got worse, she told her daughter to drink water and stop being theatrical. Another mom chimed in, explaining that some parents just don't understand safety, which is why she only gave her kids pre-cut food. I watched the little girl's face turn crimson as she clutched her throat, unable to speak. Her lips started turning blue, while the moms kept chatting about their weekend plans. Suddenly, the girl's mother, frozen with fright, saw her daughter kneeling and screamed. Grace yelled for 911, and another mom shrieked that the child was dying as other parents just ran around uselessly. I leaped up and ran to the girl, instantly recognizing a total airway obstruction. Grace grabbed my arm as I moved behind the girl, ready to perform the pediatric Heimlich, yelling that I didn't know what I was doing and would hurt her worse. I shook her off and wrapped my arms around the child, my fist above her belly button. "Stop!" the mother yelled. "You're going to kill her! Someone get this dropout off my baby!" I pushed past Paige's flailing arms and placed my fist above Olivia's belly button, wrapping my other hand around it. Olivia jolted with the first thrust, but nothing came out. Paige yelled that I was hurting her daughter as she grabbed my shoulders. The second thrust was harder, compressing Olivia's ribs. Grace surged forward, but Olivia's third shove sent a grape flying off the coffee table and under the couch. Olivia gasped and coughed hard, turning from blue back to crimson as air rushed back into her lungs. I felt her chest rise and fall, checking her neck pulse with my arms still around her. Paige knelt beside us, crying, and reached for Olivia, who was coughing but breathing on her own. She kept repeating the same remarks as the other moms stood frozen. Grace shakily fumbled with her phone, telling the operator a child had choked but was treated, refusing to say my name or even look at me. Olivia coughed as I rubbed her back and kept her upright, watching her lips turn pink again and her eyes focus. Paige had her hands hovering over her daughter, wanting to grab her but seemingly terrified. I told them we needed paramedics to check Olivia's throat, in case the grape had caused damage on the way down or up. Jackson clung to my shirt, and I told him his friend would be okay, holding Olivia, who was still breathing heavily. The other moms whispered in the corner, glancing between me and Olivia, but never approaching me. The 8-minute wait for sirens felt like ours. When the EMTs arrived with their gear, I quickly gave them the rundown, holding Olivia steady. They looked surprised when I used medical jargon. But the lead EMT nodded and asked for my certification number, while Grace insisted I was just the babysitter. He completely ignored her, examining Olivia as I gave him my number. While he checked Olivia's neck with a light, Paige held my hand and begged me to stay. Grace pulled Paige away and whispered that she shouldn't trust me, claiming I could have hurt Olivia even more. Paige snatched her arm away and yelled at Grace, her voice filling the room. Olivia's airway was clear, but the EMTs recommended taking her to the hospital for observation after a minute without oxygen. Paige quickly asked me to join them in the ambulance. Grace blocked us from the door, stating I'd done enough harm and should leave. Another parent held her phone at an angle, clearly recording while texting. I finally spoke up, asking Grace what harm she meant after I'd saved a child's life while she worried about my tattoos. My voice was calm but icy. Her face flushed and she sputtered that she could have helped and knew what to do. Listening from the doorway, the EMT supervisor asked what was going on, his expression hardening as Grace explained her version. When I gave him my name and certification, his face changed completely. He clasped my hand and said he'd lost count of how many kids I'd rescued from the Riverside apartment fire last year. Grace's mouth just opened and closed, speechless. Hour later, after calling Mrs. Miller to explain everything, I sat in the hospital waiting room with Jackson on my lap. Mrs. Miller wanted to leave work immediately, but I promised her we were fine and I'd bring Jackson home after we checked on Olivia. Paige rushed to me from the ER, her eyes red, hugging me so hard I could barely breathe. She started to tell me what the doctor said but couldn't finish, just squeezing me. Dr. Bennett followed her out and smiled at me. He told Paige I was one of their best, loud enough for Grace and the other moms who'd followed us to hear. Grace suddenly became engrossed with her phone screen as Dr. Bennett shook my hand and said he'd trust me with his kids any day. Grace's obsession with certificates and degrees was strange, especially since she didn't even know basic first aid. This group seemed more interested in comparing nanny resumes than actually watching their kids. It was almost too late to notice that. Poor child, turning blue. Grace's wedding ring clicked against her phone screen as she typed in the corner of the waiting area, shooting me unpleasant looks every few seconds while Paige thanked me and Dr. Bennett checked on other patients. One of the playdate moms approached me with a guilty expression and apologized for how they'd treated me earlier. But Grace snarled at her from across the room to remember her side, and the mom scurried back to the group like a scared kid. I sat with Paige for 2 more hours while they monitored Olivia, watching Grace tap away at her phone, clearly plotting something. When Mrs. Miller picked up Jackson after leaving work early, the EMTs had told her everything. She hugged me in front of everyone and said she'd never been prouder to have me watch Jackson, calling hiring me the best decision she'd ever made. Grace watched from her corner with narrowed eyes and furiously moving fingers like she was typing a novel on her phone. After all that, the drive home felt unreal. By the time I got back to my apartment at 7 o'clock that night, I was exhausted, my knees stained with grass from kneeling next to Olivia on Grace's lawn, on my hand shaking from the adrenaline crash. My roommate asked what happened when he saw my clothes, as I was telling him about the choking, the Heimlich, and the hysterical moms. My phone started buzzing with Facebook notifications. Someone had tagged me in something popular. I checked the app and saw I'd been tagged in a post in the 10,000-member Westchester Moms Network group, where suburban moms shared advice and gossip. The moment I clicked, my stomach dropped. Grace had written a lengthy post accusing me of assaulting a child in her home, claiming I'd performed dangerous procedures without consent and traumatized everyone there. She made me sound like a violent criminal who'd harmed Olivia instead of saving her life. Outraged comments about unqualified adolescent babysitters and how I could put children at risk were already piling up. I watched the comment count climb from 50 to 100 to 200 in the 10 minutes I stared at my phone. Mrs. Miller called me, her voice trembling. She said 3 of her mom friends had forwarded Grace's article asking if I was her babysitter. Even though she kept saying she knew it was lies and would defend me, I could tell she was worried about my reputation. Grace had posted my full name and a photo of me from that day, probably taken when I wasn't looking. Suddenly, hundreds of strangers knew who I was and what I looked like. The comments got worse as I scrolled, with people sharing my full name, photo, and even screenshots of my LinkedIn profile that someone had found. One mom found my Instagram and posted screenshots of my tattoos to prove I wasn't child-friendly. Grace would lie whenever someone said something positive or asked for more details, claiming I'd refused to let real adults help and that I'd used excessive force on a small child, painting me as a reckless teenager who'd endangered everyone. Paige called around 11 that night, crying so loudly I couldn't understand her. She said Grace would sue her if she denied the account or defended me online. She mentioned Grace's husband was a partner at a big law firm, and Grace was using that to scare her into silence, insisting Olivia could have been saved without violence if I'd just let Grace handle it, which was insane. Since Grace had been screaming and trying to stop me, Paige apologized again, saying she wanted to help but was terrified of Grace. I told her it wasn't her fault, even though I felt awful thinking about Grace tormenting the mom whose daughter I'd saved. I barely slept that night when I woke up. My phone had 47 missed calls and several texts. Going through them, I saw that 3 of my regular babysitting families had canceled jobs due to online concerns. Then I saw an email that made my blood run cold. My paramedic certification board had received a formal complaint about my conduct and would investigate. This could mean losing my certification if Grace's lies were believed. After 500 shares and 2,000 comments, Grace's post had spread across mom groups in Westchester and beyond, circulating my name and photo like I was a wanted criminal. While I was trying to figure out what to do, Paige contacted me. She wanted to meet at a coffee shop in an hour. She said it was urgent and she had something that might help. I got dressed and drove there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. She was sitting in a back corner booth when I arrived, looking around anxiously, as if she feared someone might see us together. She handed a flash drive across the table with trembling hands when I sat down. Leaning in close, she explained that her purse's nanny cam had caught everything, and she always recorded playdates for peace of mind. She'd saved Olivia's life. While Grace screamed and tried to pull me away from her daughter, Paige had watched the video a dozen times and said it showed I did everything perfectly while Grace actively interfered with emergency aid. Despite her fear of Grace's threats, she couldn't let Grace take credit for protecting her child. I drove straight from the coffee shop to meet with a lawyer my EMT supervisor had recommended that morning. After she watched the video on her laptop, her face went from professional concern to outright rage. She replayed the part where Grace grabbed my arm as I was doing the Heimlich, shaking her head, and explaining that this was assault on a minor responder and interference with emergency medical help, which could lead to criminal charges. The lawyer warned that Grace's social media defamation campaign was just piling on her legal troubles for trying to stop me from saving a child's life, especially with such clear video evidence. I was still in bed when Mrs. Miller's trembling voice called me the next morning. She told me she'd been kicked out of 2 playdate groups overnight, receiving messages from group admins claiming they couldn't have someone who employed risky caregivers. One mom even contacted her at work to say she was irresponsible for keeping me. Jackson had been wondering all morning why his friend Tommy's mom said he couldn't come over, and she didn't know how to explain it to him. How do you explain adult pettiness to a 4-year-old who just wants to play with dinosaurs? She apologized for calling so early, but I could tell she was stressed. She said 3 moms had stopped her at pickup yesterday, demanding to know if she would keep hiring Grace's friends attack her. I scrolled through Facebook that afternoon and saw the original post about me had over 500 comments. Some woman, claiming to be a pediatric nurse, had written lengthy comments about how my aggressive technique could have damaged an organ. Despite never attending the playdate, she was reviewing frame-by-frame screenshots shared by someone else, circling my hand placement and adding medical phrases to sound professional. Grace responded to every critical comment with "Thank you for your professional insight," ignoring the paramedics and physicians trying to correct the misinformation. Grace deleted their comments or reported them as harassment when my paramedic friends from training posted links to Red Cross guidelines explaining that what I did was textbook pediatric choking treatment. The phony nurse kept insisting children should never receive violent abdominal thrusts, and that I should have encouraged the youngster to cough, which made me want to scream because you can't cough with a blocked airway. 3 days later, I arrived at the fire station for my EMT shift to find my supervisor, Tom, in his office, with a stack of documents and a grim face. The state board had received a written complaint that I was unstable, abusive, and hostile toward youngsters. Even though he knew it was nonsense, he had to document everything. I saw the complaint form where Grace's lies were used to check every potential violation, including substance addiction and mental instability. Grace's fingers flying across her phone screen while the kid she failed to save was being monitored. Next level cold. Tom said he'd written his supportive response, but warned that the investigation could affect my certification renewal, which made my stomach drop because this work was my career path, not just a side gig for cash. Paige texted me that night to come over. When I arrived, Olivia ran down the driveway yelling, "My hero," and throwing her arms around my legs. Paige opened her laptop to screenshots of a private Facebook group where Grace was coordinating her campaign, instructing other moms what complaints to file and where, even offering template letters they could copy and paste. Grace told people to cite my tattoos as indicators of poor judgment and how I seized her friend's child without permission. Twisting the life-saving intervention into an attack, Paige was recording everything, but she looked exhausted as she explained how Grace had been calling other moms all day, threatening to ban them from the Christmas party and summer pool club if they didn't go along with her story. As I helped Olivia color at Paige's kitchen table the next morning, car door slammed, and Paige saw one of the playdate moms snapping photos of my car in the driveway through the blinds. Within an hour, Paige received a text from an unknown number, Grace's husband's law firm. By lunchtime, an official cease and desist letter with fancy letterhead arrived by courier. Paige was warned that releasing any images, videos, or libelous content about Grace would violate privacy regulations. The letter specifically mentioned the playdate security footage, which was captured without approval. Paige's hands shook as she read it. She knew they had powerful lawyers and deep pockets, while she was a single parent working 2 jobs who couldn't afford a legal battle. The morning of day 4, Dr. Bennett called while I was making coffee. Grace's lawyer had contacted the hospital, demanding she retract any statement supporting me. Despite Paige's consent, they threatened to report her to the medical board for violating patient privacy by disclosing Olivia's treatment, and demanded she sign a statement claiming she couldn't guarantee my actions were appropriate. She told me she'd contacted the hospital's legal department and was writing a formal medical report about Olivia's treatment, emphasizing she would have died without quick intervention. I could hear her rage when she mentioned Grace would have let a child die to protect her ego. That day, I truly understood Grace's reach. Even though I usually got many texts about babysitting gigs before midday, my phone went silent. I checked my babysitting app and found 3 cancellations from frequent families, all with unexplained schedule changes. A parent I'd worked for over a year didn't answer my text for hours before admitting Grace had contacted everyone in their Mommy and Me group. She sent me a screenshot of Grace's message, warning that anyone who hired me would enable dangerous behavior and be excluded from all group activities, including their popular music class and the weekly playground meets that were essential for social survival. My lawyer, Rachel, filed a counter cease and desist against Grace on day 5 for defamation and interference with business relationships, as well as a formal complaint to the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges for interfering with emergency medical aid. She stressed that blocking someone from rescuing a choking child could be reckless endangerment, and with numerous witnesses and video proof, Grace might face jail time if the DA pursued it. Rachel explained the complicated legal paperwork simply. Grace had messed with the wrong person and was about to learn that her husband's expensive lawyers couldn't shield her from criminal accusations. Grace filed for a restraining order on day 6, claiming I was stalking and harassing her through my friend's social media posts. She printed out every comment supporting me and highlighted parts where people called her negligent or dangerous. To prove I was coordinating a concerted harassment campaign, the hearing was the following week. The temporary injunction banned me from being within 500 feet of her home, or any location she might be. This effectively ruled out working for half my clients, as they all lived in the same neighborhood. I was surrounded by legal papers and photographs when Mrs. Miller knocked on my door that evening, Jackson holding a casserole dish. She looked at the clutter on my coffee table, set the food down, and hugged me. Jackson hopped onto the couch next to me with a paper in his hand. It was a drawing of me in a crimson cape next to a tiny girl, with Hero written above it in wobbly, 4-year-old handwriting. When he asked why Mrs. Grace was mean to me, I didn't know how to explain to a child that some adults care more about their image than people's lives. While Jackson was coloring, my phone buzzed, and Paige's name popped up, making my stomach drop because she never called me. She explained that Grace had filed a report with Child Protective Services CPS, claiming Paige had endangered Olivia by letting an unqualified person assault her daughter. My whole body went cold as she spoke. The report stated that Paige had failed to protect Olivia from me, and CPS was investigating her parenting. Jackson cheerfully drew more pictures while Paige wailed on the phone about them, doubting her fitness as a mother. I couldn't believe Grace would go this far just because I saved her daughter's life. I received a flood of texts from friends wondering if I'd seen the news. The next morning, I saw my face on the local morning show with the headline Babysitter. Scandal splits rich suburb, along with Grace's worst social media photos. The reporter was outside Grace's house, asking her how horrified she was that someone like me was allowed near children. And they kept saying I hadn't commented, even though no one had asked me. Within hours, my EMT colleagues posted videos online, describing the pediatric Heimlich maneuver and why every second counts in a choking emergency. Several mentioned my name and confirmed I followed protocol. My paramedic union issued a statement defending my actions. But Grace's mom group countered that we were protecting ourselves rather than the children. I was recognized at the grocery store the next day because of the news coverage I was reaching. For milk, when I heard a woman loudly telling her friend that I was that violent babysitter from TV, another shopper immediately jumped in, saying she'd seen the real story online about how I'd saved a kid's life, starting a full-blown argument in IL. 3. My lawyer called me in for deposition prep and showed me printouts of Grace's social media history from years prior, revealing posts where she'd targeted people she thought were beneath her. This included 2 previous nannies who'd quit after harassment campaigns, a house cleaner she'd accused of theft without evidence, and a contractor she'd tried to destroy online because he'd parked his work truck in front of her house. Her previous attempts had been smaller, but this one had TV, attention, legal threats, and an entire community watching. That afternoon, Paige informed me that Olivia had been calling me her angel and thanking me for saving her every day. But they couldn't meet me due to legal concerns, even though I saved Olivia's life. Paige's husband blamed her for trusting me with their daughter during the CPS investigation, which was destroying their marriage. When the restraining order hearing came sooner than expected, Grace was waiting at the courthouse with 3 lawyers in fancy suits and a hefty folder of evidence. She looked like a worried suburban mother protecting her community in court. and several of her friends supported her in the gallery. Grace started crying on cue as she testified about how had physically attacked a child and created an atmosphere of dread. In their community, where mothers were afraid to leave their children with anyone, this well-dressed, eloquent mother claimed she couldn't sleep at night knowing I had access to other innocent children, and the judge seemed to believe her. My lawyer then presented a tablet and explained that Paige's living room nanny cam had filmed the entire event. He stated that Grace had filed a CPS report against Paige for saving her daughter's life, which made him question Grace's motivations. This goes beyond her pride and image, he said. I saved Olivia's life while Grace yelled at me to stop and tried to pull me away from the suffocating child. The courtroom went silent. Grace's lawyers screeched that the tape was illegal, but the judge watched Grace aggressively interfering with life-saving help while her daughter's lips turned blue. Watching Grace grab my arms and try to stop me from performing the Heimlich maneuver changed the judge's expression. After the video concluded with Olivia breathing again thanks to me, he looked at Grace in disgust. He denied the restraining order and said Grace might be charged with false police reporting and interfering with emergency medical help. He praised my actions and warned that interfering with life-saving help could have killed a child. Grace fled the courtroom, her lawyers scrambling after her, leaving her supporters stunned at how quickly their story had unraveled. The next morning, my phone was buzzing with notifications from the local press. Video vindicates Babysitter. In choking incident. Everyone who had called me a monster now wanted to listen. Grace's Facebook group went into damage control mode, some members saying they'd been deceived and others claiming the security tape was manipulated. While having breakfast, I read through the comments and saw mothers arguing about whether Grace had lied or been confused in the moment. Even though her lawyer presumably told her to steer clear of me, Paige and Olivia answered my doorbell that evening. The little girl handed me a piece of construction paper with crayon stick figures and the words, "Thank you for saving me," scrawled in shaky letters across the top. Paige's eyes were red as she told me the CPS investigator had watched the security footage 3 times and was closing the case since I saved her daughter's life. She hugged me on my porch while Olivia wrapped her arms around my knees, and I felt my chest loosen for the first time since this nightmare began. The next day, my phone was full of texts from families I'd worked for over the years. Some apologized for doubting me, and 2 immediately offered me jobs. Even with video proof, many others remained silent, and I knew my reputation would suffer for longer than any news cycle. The DA's office announced an investigation against Grace for interfering with emergency medical aid and making false police reports, which could lead to serious penalties. Her husband's law firm suddenly withdrew from defending her within hours. By midday, she'd hired a famous criminal defense attorney who specialized in keeping rich people out of jail. Grace's new strategy became clear when her lawyer stated she was distraught, watching a child nearly die and didn't think properly when she tried to stop me from helping. Her remaining supporters started the Mothers in Crisis campaign, arguing that punishing a woman for protecting children would set a dangerous precedent and criminalize maternal instincts. They held protests and flooded social media with stories about mothers who made mistakes in panic and shouldn't be punished for caring too much. A local news producer asked me to give an on-camera interview to explain my perspective. After thinking about it, I accepted, even though appearing on TV made me queasy. I wore my EMT uniform with patches and pins identifying my credentials. The morning of the interview, so everyone could clearly see who I was, about 20 demonstrators held posters reading, "Protect our children and credentials matter" outside the station, chanting about protecting kids from incompetent caretakers. Even when they yelled that I was exploiting a tragedy for fame, I walked by them with my head high and uniform pressed sharp. The studio host was amazed by my calmness and professionalism. The red recording light blinked on as we sat under the bright lights, and she asked me to list my years of training and expertise, which I did calmly. When she mentioned the playdate, I recounted how I saved Olivia using medical terms but keeping it simple for viewers. She asked about Grace, and I looked right at the camera and explained that a child nearly died because Grace cared more about my appearance than helping. That night's interview was shared thousands of times, with medical specialists from around the world commenting on the textbook reaction to pediatric choking. The hashtag #JustTheBabysitter trended as childcare Professionals shared their stories of being undervalued despite their training and expertise. Grace's Mothers in Crisis campaign faded as more people saw the clip and heard from medical authorities about Olivia's near-death experience. The next day, Mrs. Miller called to say she was hosting a support gathering at her house for all the families I'd worked with who wanted to show their support. That evening, 12 families filled her living room, including parents and kids I'd babysat since I was 16. One mother got choked up telling everyone how I caught her son's allergic reaction before she did and got him to the hospital, while another shared how I'd taught her daughter to manage thunderstorm anxiety. The kids made an Emma Saves the Day banner and put it on the mantle while their parents told stories and hugged me. My lawyer called the next morning to tell me Grace had filed a $500,000 slander lawsuit just when I thought things were getting better. She claimed my TV interview had ruined her reputation and caused PTSD requiring intense therapy. She said her submission included a psychiatric report stating she couldn't sleep, had panic attacks when she saw children eating and had to withdraw from all social activities due to the embarrassment and pain I inflicted by speaking publicly about the incident. 3 weeks later, Grace's preliminary hearing for criminal charges was held at the Westchester County Courthouse. I sat behind the prosecutor, watching Grace fidget in her designer suit while witness after witness testified. The first playdate. Mom twisted her wedding band as she testified that Grace had grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away while Olivia choked. When the defense lawyer questioned her, she backtracked, saying maybe she misremembered because everything happened so fast. Another mom said Grace interfered, but she was focused on her own child and couldn't remember what Grace said. The prosecutor then showed Grace's home security footage, which clearly showed her physically detaining me for several seconds while Olivia's face turned blue. Even Grace's lawyer looked uncomfortable watching it on the courtroom monitor. Court set the trial for 3 months and denied the defense's petition to dismiss, stating there was sufficient evidence that Grace's actions could have resulted in a child's death. Grace's husband served her separation papers at their home the next morning. By midday, she released a sobbing video on social media, crying, "I damaged her family and life over a mistake." Her fans instantly started a GoFundMe. That raised $12,000 in 6 hours, branding me a homewrecker and claiming Grace was vilified for protecting children from an unsuitable teenager. I returned to my EMT job full-time to avoid the online controversy, finding my locker covered in printed screenshots of encouraging comments from the viral video and a banner reading our hero. My partner left a sticky note on my equipment saying, "Heroes come with tattoos too," and the staff bought me a purple stethoscope to match my hair. After months of chaos, taking calls and helping people who respected my expertise felt like coming home. And I slept better after 12-hour shifts than I had since this whole ordeal began. When CPS closed her case with no findings the next day, Paige called me, crying with relief. She'd been afraid they'd take Olivia because she'd let me babysit. Her first public show of support was a long message about how I saved her daughter's life and how grateful she was. Grace's fans flooded her comments within 10 minutes, calling her an unfit mother and threatening to report her to CPS again for defending a dangerous babysitter. My lawyer called me at work the next morning and told me to sit down because what he was about to show me would make me angry. He then forwarded screenshots from a whistleblower within Grace's mom group, showing Grace explicitly instructing other moms to file false complaints about me with licensing boards, CPS, and the health department. Grace's lawyer calling her behavior? Maternal instinct was like calling a food fight nutritional distribution. The words exist, their true meaning got lost between reality and legal fees. Grace's deadliest message read, "I don't care if it's true, just make her life hell," until she disappears, followed by a list of agencies to contact and allegations to make. As I read dozens of emails revealing Grace directing a harassment campaign, signing different moms to file different complaints to make it look random, and providing a template with exact phrasing, my hands shook. My lawyer promptly filed everything, with the court and prosecutor, and within hours, 3 organizations confirmed they'd received practically identical accusations about me. Within 2 days, the prosecutor charged Grace with conspiracy and criminal harassment, and several moms were accused of filing fake reports. The mom group's Facebook page went into disarray, as members realized they could face legal consequences. Some posted public apologies and retracted their accusations, while others claimed Grace had deceived them and they didn't know the charges were bogus. The group administrator took down the page when someone exposed all the private messages to a local news station, completely shattering Grace's image as a worried mother who was simply trying to ruin a teenager's life. Page invited only families who believed my story to a playdate to support me. I almost cried as Olivia ran up to me, telling everyone Miss Emma saved me. Other parents shared how Grace had targeted other moms she didn't like, spread rumors about families that didn't fit her suburban image, and used her social influence to exclude people from community gatherings. The next morning, my favorite coffee shop owner recognized me and refused to let me pay, making me a hero babysitter latte with purple foam art. After seeing the story online, several local businesses offered complimentary meals and services. The community's support helped, especially when the pizza company delivered free dinner to the EMT station for our crew, with a note thanking me for standing up to bullies. Grace's lawyer called me 3 days later to arrange a settlement. She'd drop her civil lawsuit. If the criminal charges were reduced to a misdemeanor, the DA instantly refused, stating that interfering with emergency medical treatment created a dangerous precedent that demanded punishment. A month later, the American Academy of Pediatrics emailed me to speak at their emergency response and bystander interference conference, which sounded like a wonderful way to help others avoid what happened to me, the conference organizer said. They had been following my situation and planned to use it to teach medical professionals about untrained individuals preventing emergency treatment. I agreed instantly and started preparing my presentation. But 2 days later, my lawyer called to tell me Grace's legal team had filed an emergency motion to prevent my attendance, alleging it would prejudice potential jurors against their client. The judge dismissed it in 5 minutes, saying I could speak about my professional expertise and teach others about emergency protocols. Grace's lawyer claimed that discussing the issue publicly violated a gag order, but the judge reminded him there was no such order and advised him against frivolous arguments. While browsing Instagram 5 days before the conference, an account with no profile picture and a random username sent me a message. It started, "Emma, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I really need this to go away. I'll give you $50,000 cash if you drop the charges and move somewhere far away. This whole thing has destroyed my life, and my daughter needs her mother. Please consider my offer." I immediately screenshotted it and called the detective, who traced the IP address to Grace's home computer. Within 3 hours, cops arrived at her house with a witness tampering and bond violation warrant. She spent the night in county jail until her lawyer arranged an emergency bail hearing. The next morning, she appeared before the judge with messy hair, wrinkled clothes, and shaking hands as the prosecutor explained how she tried to bribe me to disappear. The judge revoked her bail, calling her a flight risk and a threat to the justice system. 2 supporters joined her after the dozens who'd protested outside the police station, and they looked uncomfortable when the prosecutor read my screenshot. Messages. A week after Grace went to jail, while we were at the park with Mrs. Miller, Jackson asked when he could play with his old friends again. Mrs. Miller knelt and explained that they had better friends whose parents worked hard like her, and knew that Miss Emma was a hero, not just a babysitter. Later, she confided that losing Grace's social circle was the best thing for her, as she met other working parents who valued childcare providers and didn't criticize her for working. Over the next few weeks, women from that playdate sent me Facebook messages apologizing and explaining their behavior. Grace kept a mental inventory of who was loyal and who deserved social exile. One woman said she only mocked me because Grace excluded anyone who didn't follow her. Grace used her knowledge of affairs, finances, and family secrets to control her group. According to another, everyone feared Grace would target them next, so they learned to attack whoever she pointed at first. Grace's former friends described her as a cult leader in the deposition 2 months after her imprisonment. They recounted loyalty tests where Grace planted rumors about someone to see who would repeat them to the victim, punishing those who warned them or refused. One woman broke down crying, explaining how Grace had pressured everyone to avoid her sister for 6 months after she questioned Grace's treatment of a nanny. only allowing communication after the sister publicly apologized at a group dinner. The prosecution's expert witness, a psychologist who examined Grace, stated that she had narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits. Needing constant praise and control, and lacking empathy for others, she considered inferior. Week after the depositions, I was contacted by the head of a famous childcare training institution to teach emergency response classes. She claimed my example showed a huge gap in teaching about bystander interference and emergency protocols, and they wanted someone with real-world experience to train future childcare providers. The compensation was quadruple what I made babysitting, with full benefits, and the chance to save lives by teaching crisis response. My first day teaching, I walked into a classroom of 30 excited students, several of whom recognized me from TV and said they'd decided to become childcare workers after seeing how I handled the situation. Because of my experience, one young woman lingered after class to tell me she was going to get her EMT certification. She'd never realized how vital medical training was for childcare workers. 2 weeks into my new job, Grace's remaining supporters organized a maternal rights rally outside the courthouse as a last desperate move. While driving by on my lunch break, I saw 12 people holding signs about government overreach and the criminalization of motherhood. Across the street were 3 times as many counter-protesters, including parents whose kids I babysat and medical professionals supporting emergency response. The local news barely mentioned it, broadcasting a 10-second clip at the end, with the anchor adding that popular opinion had changed considerably since the occurrence. Grace's fourth lawyer submitted a motion to withdraw from the case. Following Monday, citing irreconcilable disagreements with his client, her new counsel promptly requested a postponement, stating they needed months to analyze the case files. The judge slammed them, claiming Grace had been exploiting lawyer changes to delay for too long. The trial date was set for the following month with no more extensions, warning that any further postponements would result in obstruction charges. Trial prep consumed my life for weeks, and I finally slept through the night for the first time since the whole disaster started, because my panic had hardened into steel. Every time I thought about facing Grace in court, my lawyer showed me stacks of evidence during our meetings, pointing at highlighted sections of Grace's social media posts and dozens of playdate witness statements. He smiled confidently and said, "We have more proof than most prosecutors dream of." Grace offered me $50,000 to disappear. This is a lot of money for someone claiming to protect children. I wonder why she's terrified of people discovering her past actions. Paige contacted me crying one night because Grace's friends kept calling her a traitor. She pledged to testify regardless of what they said or did to her family. On day 100, Grace's lawyers tried to keep anyone with medical skills or kids off the jury by asking probing questions about whether they'd hired babysitters or had strong feelings about childcare. However, the judge consistently shut them down and limited their dismissals. The final jury included nurses, teachers, parents, and a pediatrician. People Grace's lawyer tried to exclude but couldn't. The first day of trial, opening statements, were like seeing 2 different movies about the same event. The prosecutor methodically walked the jury through the timeline, while the large screen showed Grace's home footage of her screaming at me to stop saving Olivia. Her lawyer intervened, alleging Grace went insane from maternal terror while seeing a child in danger. Several jurors rolled their eyes when he suggested I was a careless adolescent who got lucky, and one woman in the front row shook her head when he described Grace as the victim. On the second day, they called me to testify, and I spent 3 hours recounting the day from arriving at the playdate to administering the Heimlich, all while Grace struggled to pull me away. When her lawyer asked if I had sufficient training, I remained calm and rattled off every certification date, protocol number, and hour of training I'd completed. He kept trying to make me look irresponsible and unqualified, like I'd acted without thinking. The prosecutor kept objecting and showing the video of Grace practically grabbing my arms while I was compressing a choking child. Everything changed when Grace's lawyer sarcastically asked if I'd ever saved someone before that day, implying I was unskilled. The prosecution shouted that he'd opened the door to my entire professional history, allowing me to describe every rescue. While Grace shrank in her chair, I spent the next hour listing the 7-year-old who drowned at the community pool, the diabetic teenager who went into shock at the mall, the elderly man with a heart attack at the grocery store, and the baby with a severe allergic reaction, detailing each save with dates and outcomes. Her lawyer objected, but the court reminded him he'd asked the question. 2 jurors were crying by the time I finished explaining my fire chief and emergency services. Recommendation letters. Paige's testimony on day 3 broke my heart as she wept, describing how she'd frozen watching Olivia turn blue, how she thought her baby was dying right in front of her, how I'd pushed past everyone to save her daughter as Grace tried to stop me. Grace's lawyer barely asked her any questions, undoubtedly knowing the jury was against them, especially when Paige looked directly at Grace and declared she'd never forgive her for almost killing Olivia with her meddling. Dr. Bennett testified on day 4 as an expert witness, using medical diagrams to describe choking and stating Olivia had 2 minutes before irreversible brain damage or death. One judge gasped when he showed a mannequin's arm placements to prove Grace's interference could have been fatal. On day 5, the other Playdate moms testified with varying degrees of loyalty to Grace, but under oath, most admitted she'd grabbed me and tried to stop the rescue, with one breaking down and apologizing to me on the stand, saying Grace had threatened to destroy her husband's landscaping business if she didn't support her story. On day 6, while getting water from the fountain, Olivia hugged me tightly and Paige smiled. Grace remained frozen across the hall, watching the child she almost killed cling to her rescuer. Grace's face crumpled for a moment, possibly showing guilt for the first time since everything started before her lawyer pulled her away. Grace testified with her chin up on day 7, against her legal team's wishes, trying to say she was a worried mother defending her children from a dangerous teenager. The prosecutor shattered her claims using Facebook posts, text messages, and video proof. She finally admitted to coordinating the harassment campaign against me, saying it was justified because I traumatized everyone at the playdate. The prosecutor asked if letting Olivia die would have been less distressing, but she merely stared at her hands. My lawyer called Mrs. Miller to the stand first the next day. She stood with her shoulders straight, telling everyone I'd been watching Jackson for 2 years without a single problem. She described how I usually arrived early and stayed late when she was stuck at work. Jackson would run to the door whenever I arrived because he loved me. My EMT supervisor then took the stand and showed the judge my training records, detailing how I'd scored in the top 5% of my class, saved 3 lives, and how other paramedics wanted to work with me because I stayed calm under pressure. 3 other families I'd worked for testified about how I handled their kids' allergies, tantrums, and homework, and how their kids still asked about me months later. The prosecutors showed hospital surveillance footage of me in my EMT uniform, helping car accident victims, then asked the jury if this seemed like someone who would hurt children. Grace's lawyer argued that being skilled at your profession didn't prevent mistakes. However, my boss remarked she was the most reliable on her staff when asked if I'd ever frozen in an emergency. During closing arguments the next morning, the prosecutor showed the jury images of Olivia in the hospital, her face pink and healthy after I saved her life, recounted each moment of that day, how Grace had criticized my age and appearance, tried to physically stop me from rescuing a dying child, and then tried to destroy the person who had done what she couldn't. He showed them the phony social media profiles, threatening messages, and calls to my employers trying to get me fired, urging them to consider if every lifesaver faced this kind of persecution. Grace's lawyer stood up and argued. Grace was a worried mother who panicked in a difficult situation, never meant for things to go so far, and losing her daughter's respect was punishment enough. His mistake was adding that I could have announced my training before performing, and the prosecutor leaped up to warn everyone that unconscious children can't wait for credentials. After lunch, the jury deliberated, and we waited in the hallway while reporters tried to get comments and Grace's supporters huddled in the corner, staring at me. Even though my lawyer thought the case was solid, Paige sat next to me, holding my hand as Mrs. Miller kept Jackson busy with coloring books. I was a nervous wreck because you never know what 12 strangers will decide. 3 hours later, the bailiff called us back in. Grace gripped her lawyer's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white as we entered the courtroom. Jackson climbed onto my lap with his crayons and drew ambulances while we waited as the jury members took their seats one by one, avoiding eye contact. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict, and the foreman stepped up with a piece of paper. Responding, yes, his voice steady. Grace made a wounded sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. As he read the charges, interference with emergency medical aid, conspiracy to harass, filing false police reports, witness intimidation. The judge revoked her bail right there, calling her a risk to the community. And 2 officers handcuffed her while her supporters gasped and yelled that this wasn't fair. Grace looked at me one more time, her face pale and hollow, and said, "I'm sorry." Before they escorted her past our table and into a side door, Paige squeezed my palm harder and whispered, "It's over." Right. Instead of delight or satisfaction, I felt a faint comfort that maybe I could finally sleep without checking my locks. 3 times. As we left the courtroom, reporters shoved microphones in my face, asking how it felt to win, if I forgave Grace, and what I would tell other young professionals facing discrimination. I struggled to find the words, standing in my best outfit, with the purple streaks Grace had sneered at on the courthouse steps where more cameras waited. I spoke briefly about how bystanders need basic first aid training, how every second counts in an emergency, and how qualified experts should be allowed to work without interference. I praised Mrs. Miller, my EMT supervisor, and Paige for telling the truth, even though it meant hurting her friend. Grace saying, "I'm sorry," while being handcuffed, was a stark contrast to the months she spent trying to trash the person who saved a child. Apologies are all about timing. I then dedicated the victory to all the EMTs and paramedics who save lives every day, often without recognition and sometimes enduring abuse from the very people they help. The Miller family took me out to celebrate that night at a Little Italian, a spot where Jackson could eat his favorite pasta and make a mess. Halfway through dinner, he gave me a construction paper and crayon book called My Hero Emma, with illustrations of me in my EMT uniform saving people from fires, car crashes, and dinosaurs. Other restaurant patrons recognized me from TV and sent over a giant chocolate cake, and the owner refused to let us pay, stating, "Anyone who saves children is welcome anytime." Jackson fell asleep on my shoulder with his picture book on the way home, and Mrs. Miller said she'd received 3 calls from different families asking if I had any babysitting openings. Over the next 4 months, I balanced my EMT shifts with teaching first aid training at the community center and eventually rebuilt my babysitting clientele. Some playgroup families never contacted me again, while new ones specifically sought an emergency responder after hearing what happened. I'd see people at the grocery store, either thanking me for standing up to bullies or staring at me, and wonder if they recognized me from the news or were Grace's fans. Oh. The nightmares faded, but never completely went away, so I still double-checked my locks and saved screenshots of strange messages. I attended Grace's sentencing 5 months after the trial, seeing her in a conservative suit instead of her usual fashionable outfits. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service at the Children's Hospital, therapy, and anger management programs. Her lawyer estimated she had to pay over $40,000 for my legal bills, plus the salary I missed from the families who'd fired me. Grace read a statement admitting that her pride and prejudice had endangered a child's life, that she'd put her ego before Olivia's safety, and that she'd tried to destroy someone whose only crime was being young and different while working. The next day, Paige called to ask me to a special first aid training day for parents at the community center. She wanted me to teach. For 6 hours, we taught CPR, choking response, and wound care to 30 families, including several from that playdate. Olivia skipped around the room, telling everyone how I saved her life and showing off her junior EMT badges. I taught them how to position their hands and apply pressure on practice dummies. One of the moms who had laughed at me that day apologized later, saying she'd been foolish to judge me by my age and appearance, and that she'd taken a whole first aid course herself to never be that useless in an emergency again. After covering everything from allergic reactions to broken bones, Paige decided to make it a monthly event, bringing in different emergency responders to teach parents how to protect their kids in seconds. My therapy sessions helped me process everything in the months that followed. One afternoon, while sorting mail, I found an envelope with Grace's handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands during my session. She'd written 3 pages about how she was afraid of losing control and status, how watching me save Olivia had shattered her worldview, and how she was learning about narcissistic injury and treatment. She asked for forgiveness, but I folded the letter and put it in my bag, knowing I wasn't ready. A week later, the Pediatric Training Center contacted me with a full-time offer to build their curriculum. When I told my babysitting families, they threw me a goodbye party at the park, where Jackson clung to my leg and made me promise to come for emergencies. My first major conference had me standing in front of 200 childcare providers, clicking through slides of the Grape incident and reaction tactics with steady hands. After I finished, hundreds more shared their stories of being dismissed and misjudged, forming an informal support network. Paige sent me a video of Olivia's kindergarten show and tell, where she proudly showed her class the child-safe choking warning and told everyone about her hero Emma, while her teacher took notes to apply it school-wide. I was reviewing training materials when a hospital nurse told me she'd seen Grace reading books and interacting with the kids in the children's ward. My lawyer called to say Grace's insurance had paid the defamation countersuit, and I immediately used the money to fund EMT training scholarships, the first going to a young woman with tattoos who'd been told she wasn't professional enough for healthcare. One night, Mrs. Miller asked me to babysit so she could attend a promotion ceremony she never would have pursued without seeing my strength through everything of me saving people. I ran into one of the original Playdate moms at the grocery store while buying milk. She apologized profusely and told me her daughter was signed up for my first aid class next week. I saw Grace in the back row of my evening class, sitting quietly beside a friend who was fostering children, taking careful notes without making eye contact until after class, when she briefly thanked me for the instruction before leaving. When Paige brought Olivia to visit, the training facility had become my second home. Olivia proudly displayed her junior first responder certificate for my kids' class and demonstrated proper hand placements and emergency procedures with the confidence of a true learner. Olivia turned and said, "Thank you for saving me so I could save others too." As they left, I felt a physical force, realizing that terrifying moment in Grace's living room had led me exactly where I needed to be, teaching hundreds of people the skills that could make the difference between tragedy and triumph, a child lost and a life saved.